Three empires, three collapses, and now we're standing on the edge of the same cliff. History isn't random. It moves in patterns, ruthless, mathematical, precise. Spain, Britain, the Soviet Union, each ruled the world, each believed their power eternal, and each collapsed in almost the same way. Today, in 2025, the United States walks that same path, step by step, decision by decision, as if guided by an invisible script written centuries ago. But before we look at the present, we have to understand what collapse really looks like. Not as a headline, not as a chart, but as a lived reality. Because when empires die, they don't announce it. They fade first, then fracture, then fall. It never begins with invasion. It begins with exhaustion. Economic exhaustion, moral exhaustion. The kind that builds slowly, unnoticed, until one morning the world wakes up and realizes that the empire is gone. That's how it happened to Spain. Spain, 1590, the richest empire on earth. Half the world's silver and gold flowed into its ports. Its galleons ruled the seas. Its armies ruled Europe. Its language and religion spread across continents. To outsiders, Spain looked unstoppable, the hand of God on earth. But beneath that glittering surface, cracks were spreading through the foundation. The first stage of every empire's fall begins the same way, with ambition that outruns ability. Spain's kings wanted everything. They fought the Ottomans in the Mediterranean, the French in Italy, the Dutch in the Low Countries, and the English across the sea. 4 continents, endless fronts. The treasury groaned under the weight of war, but pride demanded more ships, more soldiers, more flags planted on foreign soil. Philip II believed the empire's wealth could never run out. After all, each month ships arrived heavy with silver from the New World. But silver, like confidence, is a finite resource, and when you rely on it too much, you forget how to produce real value. To pay for war, Spain began borrowing from Italian bankers, German financiers, anyone willing to lend. When loans weren't enough, they debased their coins, mixing copper into silver. At first, no one noticed. The coins looked the same, until merchants weighed them. Then came inflation, panic, and the slow erosion of trust in money itself. 4 bankruptcies in 40 years followed, each one temporary, each one deeper than the last. Gold and silver had made Spain rich, but it also made Spain lazy. Why build ships when you can buy them? Why grow wheat when you can import it? Why teach your children trade when the mines of Potosi and Zacatecas pour treasure into your hands? The nobility began to see work as shameful. The economy hollowed out from within. All wealth flowed through Spain, none of it stayed. And when the mines began to run dry, when storms sank the treasure fleets, there was nothing left to fall back on. Agriculture had withered. Industry had vanished. The empire that once ruled the seas now begged for grain from its rivals. By the 1640s, Spain had lost Portugal, the Netherlands, and its dominance in Europe. A century later, it was a ghost of power, grand in memory, irrelevant in reality. Spain's story became a warning, but no one listened. 300 years later, another island empire would repeat the same mistakes, this time on an even grander scale. Britain, 1914, the height of empire. A quarter of the planet under its flag. London, the financial capital of the world. The pound sterling, the global reserve currency. The Royal Navy, undisputed master of the seas. To the British people, empire wasn't just policy, it was destiny. But destiny is fragile when built on debt. At the dawn of the 20th century, Britain was already stretched to its limits. Colonies in Africa, garrisons in Asia, protectorates in the Middle East, each demanded ships, soldiers, supplies. Then came 1914, the Great War. The decision to enter what was supposed to be a quick European conflict would instead drain the empire's lifeblood. For 4 years, Britain fought with everything it had, and much it didn't. It borrowed billions from the United States. By 1918, victory came, but at a cost too heavy to carry. The empire was exhausted, and for the first time, Britain owed more than it owned. Still, they believed recovery was inevitable. They would rebuild. But recovery never came, because what followed was economic arrogance. The belief that the pound's supremacy could be maintained by willpower alone. Before the war, 1 British pound was backed by a fixed weight of gold, but war had forced the government to abandon that promise. When peace returned, they tried to restore it, at the same pre-war value, pretending nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Factories were outdated, debts astronomical, and America now held the world's gold. The pound was overvalued, Exports collapsed, unemployment soared. By 1931, Britain gave up the gold standard altogether. The currency dropped overnight, 25% in a single stroke. For the first time in centuries, the pound sterling wasn't trusted as the anchor of world trade. And once trust breaks, it rarely returns. Then came World War II, a second war they couldn't afford but couldn't avoid. To defeat Hitler, Britain borrowed again and again, this time pledging its empire as collateral. By 1945, victory came once more, but the empire itself was mortally wounded. India, the crown jewel, gained independence in 1947. Within 2 decades, Africa followed. By 1970, Britain's overseas holdings had vanished. The phrase, "the empire where the sun never sets," turned into a quiet irony, because now the sun had finally gone down. The financial collapse mirrored the political one. In 1940, £1 equaled over $4. By 1980, it barely reached 2. Today, it's less than 1.5, a regional currency for a regional power. Britain still holds a permanent seat at the UN Security Council, still sells nuclear submarines, still pretends to global relevance. But the illusion fools no one. Behind the pomp of royal weddings and Westminster debates lies the quiet truth. Britain traded real power for prestige. It clung to symbolism long after substance was gone. It believed it could manage decline. But decline, once it begins, manages you. And yet, even after Spain's fall and Britain's descent, the world would see the pattern unfold again. This time not under kings or queens, but under the hammer and sickle. The Soviet Union rose from the ashes of war, promising a new order, a workers' paradise that would last forever. For half a century, it looked unstoppable. But beneath the banners and the parades, the same ancient rot began again. Overextension, stagnation, decay. The Soviet Union, 1945. A superpower born from ruin, forged in blood, convinced of its destiny. Its armies had defeated Nazi Germany. Its flag flew over Berlin. Its ideology promised equality and strength. From Warsaw to Vladivostok, the hammer and sickle became the symbol of a new world. And for decades, it seemed to work. Factories roared, missiles launched, satellites pierced the skies. The Soviet model promised to outlast capitalism itself, a planned economy that could never fail, a society united by purpose instead of profit. But beneath the concrete of that vision, cracks spread unseen. Every empire believes it is exceptional, and that belief is always its undoing. The Soviet Union was built on control of speech, of production, of thought. But control kills innovation. When people are punished for failure, they stop taking risks. When rewards are fixed, creativity dies. By the 1970s, the great Soviet machine began to stall. Factories still produced, but what they produced, nobody wanted. Televisions that broke in a month, cars that froze in winter, shoes that fell apart in days. Quantity replaced quality. Pride replaced progress. Oil revenue kept the illusion alive. The world bought Soviet oil and gas, and Moscow spent the proceeds on armies and allies. From Cuba to Ethiopia, from Vietnam to Afghanistan, the Kremlin poured money into foreign revolutions, convinced that influence equaled strength, but the cost was unsustainable. 15 to 20% of the nation's entire GDP went to the military, triple America's share. And when oil prices collapsed in the 1980s, the entire system began to suffocate. For the first time, the Soviet Union had to import grain from the United States, the very nation it swore to bury. It was more than irony, it was humiliation. A country with some of the richest farmland on earth couldn't feed itself. Shelves emptied, people traded rubles for anything real, cigarettes, Western jeans, a can of Coca-Cola. The ruble itself became a joke. It couldn't be exchanged abroad, and even at home, no one trusted it. When a nation stops believing in its own money, the countdown begins. By the mid-1980s, the gold reserves were draining, oil production falling, and the army, once a symbol of pride, had become a financial anchor dragging the country into the abyss. Then came 1989. The Berlin Wall, that concrete symbol of division, cracked and crumbled under the weight of its own futility. Eastern Europe walked away. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, one by one they slipped out of Moscow's grasp, and for the first time in living memory, the Red Army didn't move to stop them. It couldn't. There was no money left to fight. Within 2 years, the unthinkable happened. December 26, 1991, the Soviet Union ceased to exist. 70 years of empire erased in less than 900 days. No invasion, no grand battle, just economic implosion. 30,000 nuclear weapons, and yet the government couldn't pay its soldiers or keep the lights on. One of the most powerful states in human history collapsed from within, undone by the same old pattern: overextension, currency decay, debt, loss of productive capacity, social rot, collapse. 3 times, history repeated itself. 3 times, the warning was ignored. And now, for the 4th time, the pattern unfolds again. America, 2025. Still the world's largest economy, still the issuer of the global reserve, still the guardian of international order, or at least that's what it tells itself. But behind the speeches and the slogans, the numbers tell a colder truth. The United States spends more on its military than the next 10 countries combined. 750 bases in 80 nations, troops in 150 countries, everywhere at once, and increasingly, nowhere effectively. The weight of empire is enormous, and it rests on the shoulders of a nation already buckling under debt. $36 trillion owed, and climbing by the second. Interest payments alone are nearing $1 trillion a year, more than the entire defense budget. Every empire that reached this point believed it could manage the debt, that tomorrow's growth would pay for today's indulgence. But tomorrow always comes, and the bill always arrives. The dollar, once as good as gold, now floats on faith alone. Since 1971, when Nixon closed the gold window, America has lived in a paper world, money created not by production, but by decree. 400% expansion of the money supply since the year 2000. 6 trillion printed since 2020. Each new dollar weakens the old ones. Each promise erodes the foundation of trust. It's not alchemy, it's arithmetic. And yet the illusion of strength continues: a stock market that rises on debt, a currency supported by habit, a population distracted by outrage and entertainment. Like Spain, America still believes it can buy what it no longer makes. Manufacturing has moved abroad. Medicine, electronics, steel, even components for the military, all imported. The wealth of the empire now flows outward, while paper money flows back in. For decades, the world accepted those dollars, but that acceptance, that privilege, was never permanent. Now the cracks begin to show. Allies hedge their bets. The BRICS nations explore trade in yuan and rupees. Saudi Arabia accepts payment for oil in other currencies. Central banks hoard gold again, the oldest refuge of a system losing faith in fiat promises. It's not the end, not yet, but the same tremors that shook Spain's silver, Britain's pound, and the Soviet ruble are now felt beneath the dollar's feet. Inside the nation, signs of decay multiply. Trust in institutions collapses. Politics turns into spectacle. Homelessness spreads across once prosperous cities. Drug overdoses claim more lives than wars ever did. Families fracture, fertility falls, and the sense of shared purpose that built the country erodes with each new year. This is how societies rot, not through invasion but through apathy. The slow corrosion of belief that anything can still be fixed. And yet, this stage is not final. Spain reached this point before it lost everything. Britain reached it before Suez. The Soviet Union reached it before the wars fell. The difference now is speed. In the digital age, collapse can move faster than history ever imagined. A currency crisis can erupt overnight, spreading across markets in hours. A debt default can cascade through algorithms, freezing trade, halting economies. Empires once died over decades. Now, they can die in a weekend. But the story isn't over. History's pattern is powerful, but it isn't destiny. Empires fall because they refuse to adapt, because they cling to comfort and illusion instead of change. The math is unforgiving, but math can be rewritten if the will exists. There are still paths out of the spiral. Nations that rediscover productive strength of real value can stabilize societies that face decline honestly, not with denial, but with discipline, can renew themselves. It's rare, but not impossible. Reform before collapse is the hardest choice, but it's also the only one that works. The United States still has unmatched resources, innovation, and talent. Its collapse is not inevitable, only probable if it continues the pattern. The question is whether its leaders and its people can see the warning in time, because the pattern always begins the same way, and it always ends the same way. An empire stretches too far, spends too much, prints too freely, and believes it can defy gravity. For a while it can, but gravity always wins. The lessons are there, written in silver and debt, in broken coins and broken promises. Spain thought its treasure would last forever. Britain thought its empire would outlive its debts. The Soviet Union thought ideology could replace economics. Each was wrong. Each fell, not because of foreign enemies, but because of their own reflection. Now, America stares into that same mirror. The question isn't whether history repeats, it's whether we recognize the reflection before it's too late. If collapse comes, it will come quietly, not with an explosion, but with a sigh. A reserve currency losing value. A promise broken. A generation realizing that the world they inherited no longer exists. And somewhere, in that moment of shock, the empire will end, not with surrender, but with silence. But if renewal comes, it will begin just as quietly. In the return to work that matters, in the rebuilding of industries, the restoration of trust, the rediscovery of humility. Empires don't have to die, they can choose to live differently. It's a harder path, one that demands sacrifice, honesty, and courage. But it is still open, because history is not fate. It's a map, a record of every wrong turn ever taken. And if we read it carefully enough, it shows the way home. So, as the United States stands at the fifth stage, still powerful, still proud, but dangerously close to the edge, the choice remains to ignore the pattern and fall like those before, or to learn from it and rise again. The past has already written the warning.